वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभ गिरिवरदारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभ गिरिवरदारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी तेरा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय विष्णुपाद ब्रह्मं च परमदर्श स्तुत सदस्य श्रीमती स्वयं शेष भक्त वेदांत शील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक शील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परमदर्श स्तुत सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद लखोर किशोर दास महाराज की जय। जय विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद सेल भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय। जय विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सागम श्री जगन्नाथ दास महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। नमाचार्य श्री हरदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से को श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोर ईश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। गंगामाई की जय, यमुनामाई की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वंदे की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरु वंदे की जय, समावेद भक्त वंदे की जय, गौरव प्रेमानंदे, हरि हरि बोल. All glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to the Guru and covering all goes to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam. Divim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire. Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu. Nityam Bhagavad Sevaya. Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 3, Chapter 28, Text 11 and 12. Read Text 11. Pranayama dahet doshan dharana bish chakil bishan patyaharena samsargan dhyanena ishvaran gunan pranayama dahet Gudoshan, Dharana, Bish, Chakil Bishan, Patyaharena Samsargan, Dhyayena, Ishvaran, Gunan, Pranayama, Dahe, Doshan, Dharana, Bish, Chakil Bishan, Patyaharena Samsargan, Dhyanena, Ishvaran, Gunan. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. By practicing the process of pranayama, one can eradicate the contamination of his physiological condition, and by concentrating the mind, one can become free from activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association, and by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the three modes of material attachment. According to Ayurvedic medical science, the three items, Kapha, Pitta, and Vayu, maintain the physiological condition of the body. Modern medical science does not accept this physiological analysis as valid, but the ancient Ayurvedic process of treatment is based upon these items. Just 1 second. Sorry. According to Ayurvedic medical science, the three items, Kapha, Pitta, and Vayu, maintain the physiological condition of the body. Modern medical science does not accept this physiological analysis as valid, but the ancient Ayurvedic process of treatment is based upon these items. Ayurvedic treatment concerns itself with the cause of these three elements, which are mentioned in many places in the Bhagavatam as the basic conditions of the body. Here it is recommended that by practicing the breathing process of pranayama, one can be released from contamination created by the principal physiological elements by concentrating the mind. One can become free from sinful activities, and by withdrawing the senses, one can free himself from the material association. Ultimately, one has to meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order to be elevated to a transcendental position where he is no longer affected by the three modes of material nature. It is also confirmed, the Bhagavad Gita, that one who engages himself in unalloyed devotional service at once becomes transcendental to the three modes of material nature and immediately realizes his identification with Brahman. Sagunan Samatitaitan Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. For every item in the yoga system, there is a parallel activity in Bhakti Yoga, but the practice of Bhakti Yoga is easier for this age. What was introduced by Lord Chaitanya is not a new interpretation. Bhakti Yoga is a feasible process that begins with chanting and hearing. Bhakti Yoga and other yogas have as their ultimate goal the same personality of Godhead, but one is practical and the others are difficult. One has to purify his physiological condition by concentration and by restraint of the senses. Then he can fix his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is called Samadhi. Text 12. Yada manaha svam virajam yogena susamahitam kashtam bhagavatodhyahet swanasagra valokanaha. Translation. When the mind is perfectly purified by this practice of yoga, One should concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed eyes and see the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is clearly mentioned here that one has to meditate upon the expansion of Vishnu. The word Kashtam refers to Paramatma, the expansion of Vishnu. Expansion of Vishnu. Bhagavataha refers to Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Godhead is Krishna. From him comes the first expansion, Baladeva, and from Baladeva comes Sankarshana, Aniruddha, and many other forms, followed by the Purusha Avtaras. As mentioned in the previous verses, Purusharchanam, this Purusha is represented as the Paramatma or the Super Soul. A description of the Super Soul upon whom one must meditate will be given in the following verses. In this verse, it is clearly stated that one must meditate by fixing the vision on the tip of the nose and concentrating one's mind on the kala or the plenary expansion of Vishnu. Om Agyantimram Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurmilitam Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupkadam Dadati Swapadartikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Dapadakamalam Sri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Shabgrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Satvaitam Sabadutam Harijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Radha Sri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karunasnidho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Kshimanustete Pranamami Haripriya Manchakalpatarupe Shakvasnike Chapadganam Pavane Vaishnave Pranamam Vaishi Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karoti Vachalam Pankam Nandete Grandatkapadavan Vande Shri Guru Dhananam Paramandamadam Shri Chaitanya Ishwar. So welcome to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. And in this verse, text 11 and 12, first 11, it is mentioned as to how by practice of pranayama, one can eradicate the contamination of physiological condition. Then by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all sinful activities. And by restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association. And by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the three modes of material attachment. The first point that is mentioned here is about the pranayama process. Now, this particular sloka mentions about the dhyana yoga, which normally yogis practice. So by practicing this process of pranayama, one can eradicate this contamination of his biological condition. So as Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport, that material body, this body is made, as per Ayurvedic science, is made of three items called Kapha, Pitta and Vayu. And the proper balance of these three constituents, when it is there, then the body is in proper condition. But even if there's a slight imbalance in any of these three constituents, either in excess or lower, then the body is not in normal condition, but then one is either physically not well or mentally disturbed. So generally the modern science does not accept this Ayurvedic science, but Ayurvedic process is also a process by which these items are analyzed in the body, and then the body is kept in balance. So sometimes when one of these constituents is high or low, treatment is given by which they are brought back into balances. So it is mentioned as to how such imbalances can also be regularized by practicing this pranayama process. So in yoga, there are several stages, yama, niyama, pranayama, etc. And this pranayama stage is such that by controlling the air that is there in the body, one can control the breathing process, and by which one can be released from contamination by the principal elements, that is Kapha, Pitta and Vayu, and thereby bring the body back into proper physiological condition. So many times we see that people are disturbed. Generally in Kali Yuga, people are always disturbed. They are full of anxiety. This anxiety itself is one of the elements of disturbance in Kali Yuga, due to which people are always worried about what will happen next, what they will do, etc. So this is also, it is mentioned as one of the mental disorders. Anxiety also causes results in sleep and so many other issues also. So all these causes are controlled, are brought back into normalcy by practicing of pranayama. So in other words, this yoga which normally is being used these days is not a physical exercise of various sitting postures and various breathing postures, but rather a process by which the disorders in the body and mind, they are brought back into control. And also, yogis used to practice these yoga processes, but ultimate goal was to meditate on the form of the Lord in the heart. This is how the real science of yoga is. The Lord himself explains in the Bhagavad Gita as yoga means the process of linking with the source, that is the Supreme Lord only. The soul is linked through the yoga process to the Supreme Lord. So pranayama is one process by which one can release this contamination that is there in the physical body and the mind, by which the mind is brought under steadiness and it is controlled. And when the mind is brought under control, then one becomes free from sinful activities. And by withdrawing the senses, one can free himself from material association. So this dharana process is basically to control the steadiness, bring steadiness to the mind. But as we see here in Bhagavad Gita itself, Arjuna told Krishna in the 6th chapter that this mind is very difficult to control. Chanchalani Mana Krishna. He says the mind is restless, it is turbulent, obstinate, and very, very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it, I think it is more difficult. It's more difficult than controlling the wind. Now, controlling a wind is very, very difficult. It comes at a very high speed. Even if it is not at a very high speed, it is difficult to control a wind. So Arjuna says that controlling a mind is more difficult than even controlling a wind. So for a person in this today's situation, he has to fight so many opposing elements: office, family, children, education, financial circumstances. So many issues are there on a day-to-day basis. And Kali Yuga is nothing but disturbance, due to which everyone is generally mentally disturbed. So to bring this mental equilibrium, one is normally practicing this yoga these days, but it is not the ultimate goal which the yoga classes teach. The ultimate goal of yoga is to focus our mind on the Supreme Lord. But that can be only done by the mercy of the Lord himself. And one of the Lord's name is called Manohara, because only he can control the mind and take us away from these unwanted thoughts. And that requires a lot of petition and submission. There is a very nice prayer in the Stavavali where Sri Raghunath Das Goswami says, "O mind, I grasp your feet and beg you with sweet words, please throw away all your pride and develop intense, extraordinary love for my spiritual master, Rajabhumi and the Brahmanas, the Gayatri Mantra, the holy name, and the transcendental shelter, that is the youthful couple of Raja." So the mind is always disturbed, and the result of this is that one develops a lot of pride. There is a lot of intense love for other things. But here, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami begs for the mercy so that we may develop a love for our spiritual master, the Vrajabhumi, the Brahmanas, Gayatri Mantra, holy name, and the shelter of the Supreme Lord, and that is Radha and Krishna. So we see that now the mind is taking shelter of so many things due to our desire for sense gratification. This prayer literally begs for to take shelter of the other things like the Lord himself and the holy name. Similarly, we find in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Vitrasura is asking mercy from the Lord. He says that, "O my Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, will I again be able to be a servant of your eternal servants who find shelter only at your lotus feet?" That means the only shelter that is there for anyone is shelter of the lotus feet. And then he says, "O Lord of my life, I again become their servant, so that my mind may always think of your transcendental attributes, words that glorify those attributes, and the body to be always engaged in the loving service of the Lordships." So in the prayer, it is mentioned that how one has to beg to become the Lord's servant, so that by becoming a Lord's servant, one's mind is always engaged in thinking of the Lord's pastimes, attributes, qualities, etc. And the words are always engaged in glorifying these attributes, and the body is always engaged in the service of the Lord Himself. And for such a person who has conquered his mind, the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita that the super soul is already reached. So it is the whole chapter in this particular canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is purely focused on Dhyana Yoga, that is to meditate on the super soul or the Paramatma feature of the Lord only, nothing else. Generally, the soul does not suffer, but the body does suffer. And the only cause of suffering is the uncontrolled mind. Mind is very, very difficult to control. Instead of we trying to control us, the mind controls us. And when it is controlled, it is actually the greatest friend. And when the mind is uncontrolled, it is the greatest enemy. So in the Mukunda Mala Stotra, there is a very nice prayer which Srila Prabhupada always quotes. This Krishna Tvadiya Pada Pankaja Panjarantam Adyaiva me Vishatu Manasa Raja Hamsaha Prana Prayana Samaye Kapa Vata Pittai Kantavarodhana Vidau Smaranam Kutaste, which is very relevant to today's verse. See, the translation says, O Lord Krishna, at this moment, let the royal swan of my mind enter the tangled stem of the lotus of your feet. How will it be possible for me to remember you at the time of death, when my throat will be choked up with mucus, bile, and air? So the body is made of this bile, mucus, and air. And nobody knows at what time death will come. And at the time of death, what happens is the throat is always will get choked up with this bile, mucus, and air. And that is the time when one is about to leave the body, one does not know where his mind goes. And he goes on to so many things that are there from our past. So in this prayer, it says that let this span of mind may enter the tangled stems of the lotus feet of the Lord. That means one's mind should be twined with the lotus feet of the Supreme God only. But otherwise, it will not be possible to remember this Lord at the time of death. So whatever consciousness, whatever mind is occupied throughout our life, that is what consciousness will be at the end of one's life. And it's also said that the moon is a presiding deity of the mind. I mean, all the constituents in our body are made up of so many material elements like earth, water, fire, air, mind, intelligence, false ego, etc. And for each of these elements, there is a presiding deity. So the presiding deity for the mind is the moon. And then it is said that on a full moon day, those who are unsteady, they face a lot of difficulty. Generally, we find some people are very disturbed on this full moon day. That is because the moon is the presiding deity of the Lord. But at the same time, for Krishna, the same mind performs the moon deity performs the rasa dance on that day, enables Krishna to perform the rasa lila dance. So moon is also assisting in the service of the Lord. So it's mentioned that without the sanction of the super soul, who is seated in the heart, not a single organ can function. So we discussed about this bile, mucus, and air. So an imbalance can bring about a malfunction in any of the organs in the body. But if the super soul gives a sanction, then every organ in the body can function. This is the first part of it, that is pranayama, by which one can eradicate the contamination of his physical and mental condition. The next is, by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all sinful activities. So when the mind is occupied in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the senses, everything is engaged in the service of the Lord, by which one can become free from engaging in sinful activities. Now, all our senses, are actually controlled by 33 crore demigods, and some to see, some of them to hear, etc. And all these demigods are also dependent on the will of the Supreme. They are not independent. So when one violates by such such controlling regulations, then they have to be punished by being degraded to a lower species of life, irrespective of whoever it is, whether it's a jiva, a human being, or a demigod. If they violate a regulation, then they are automatically degraded. It is said in Srimad Bhagavatam that Indra once had to take the body of a hog because he had a desire to have a union with Brihaspati's wife, Brihaspati was his spiritual master. So he wanted to have union with his spiritual master wife, which is a very great sinful activity. So finally he had to be degraded to be taken to the body of a hog. So like that, if a jiva has a desire to eat anything that is available, then he has to be degraded to lower species of life where all those desires can be fulfilled. Another example is given: if a tongue is given to eat Krishna Prasadam, but different species have different grades of taste for eating. For example, a tiger is given very big and sharp claws and power to kill and eat its prey, because in the previous life, the living entity had developed a taste to eat other living beings. So tiger is given a body as a tiger with very sharp claws and powers to kill the prey and eat. Similarly, the birds have been given the beaks to eat worms. Many have a desire to eat small worms. In the next life, they are given the body of a bird with sharp beaks. Now, eagle has a long distance vision of about 5 kilometers, which human beings don't have. But the eagle can have a vision of 5 kilometers and it can hunt its prey also with that vision. But a human being is given a digestive system by which one can cook digestive foods, sattvic foods like vegetables, etc., and honor in the form of prasadam. So a human being is meant to eat this Krishna prasadam, which is one mentioned in Bhagavad Gita also, 3rd chapter. So by eating Krishna prasadam, the devotees of the Lord are free from all kinds of sins. So, but others who prepare food for personal enjoyment, they eat only sin. And the moment one eats sin, then accordingly is degraded to different grades of bodies. Also, it is mentioned that if a tongue is controlled, then other senses are automatically controlled. When the tongue is controlled, the others falling in one line, like the tongue, the belly, the genitals are automatically controlled. As you see, all these are situated in one line: tongue, genitals, and the belly. So if the tongue is controlled, then all the others are also controlled. So there is an example also in Srimad Bhagavatam 9th canto as to how Saubharimani actually was performing deep tapasya under the waters of Yamuna. But he just saw 2 fish deriving pleasure out of sex life and he lost his meditation. So this is how the mind can be a great disturbance also by meditating on the wrong objects. Now, the next point that is mentioned here is about meditation on the personality of Godhead. So, by dhyana or by meditating means that one has to meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by which one becomes free from the 3 modes of material attachment. That is, one becomes free from the 3 modes of material nature, that is goodness, passion, and ignorance. So that is this nice sloka in Bhagavad Gita, which says, what should one meditate upon? This is mentioned in the 8th chapter, 9th sloka. Kavim Puranim Anusha Sitaram Anor Aniyasam Anusmaretya Sarvasya Dataram Achintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasak Parastat. This translation says that one should meditate upon the Supreme Person, that is on the Supreme Lord, as the one who knows everything. The Lord of Lords knows everything, as he is the oldest. Then who is the controller? The Lord is not only the oldest, but he is also the controller. Ishvara Parama Krishna. The Lord is the supreme controller. Then who is smaller than the smallest? The Lord can become larger than the largest. At the same time, he can be smaller than the smallest. That is how he pervades even the smallest obstacle, that is called an atom in this material world. Also, who is the maintainer of everything? The Supreme Lord creates, not only creates, but also he maintains everything and ultimately he annihilates also. Then who is beyond all material conception? That is, the Supreme Lord does not have a material body, and he cannot be perceived with our material senses. So he is beyond all our material conception. We cannot perceive the Lord with our eyes, nor can we understand the Lord with our ears also, because we have material eyes and all our material. So he is beyond the material conception. And then it's mentioned who is inconceivable. One cannot understand the Lord or his potency or his qualities, and who is always a person. Lord is ultimately a person. And then finally it says that he is luminous like the sun and is transcendental beyond this material nature. So the Supreme Lord is above the three modes of material nature. That is, he is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. Therefore, it is said that one should meditate upon the Supreme Person in one of the above 9 forms that are mentioned here. There is also a quote in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which says similarly that one should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily on the tip of the nose. Thus, with an agitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me with the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. So the ultimate purpose of life is to meditate on that supreme form of the Lord with a controlled mind, devoid of fear and free from sex desire. So as long as one's mind is agitated, one cannot focus on the form of the Lord. But the ultimate purpose of all this is that to attain equanimity. I mean, one should become equanimous in all situations, equal between happiness and distress, etc. One should not become very happy when one becomes achieve something, and one should not become highly distressed when he loses something. So being undisturbed in all these situations is a state of equanimity which one should achieve. And it is said that yoga process helps one to attain that. But yoga is not a mechanical process. So in the Agni Purana, there is a quote that any person who in gladness sees the worship of the deity in the temple will obtain the results of Kriya Yoga, which are described in the Pancharatara scripture. Kriya Yoga is a system of practice like practical devotion, but service, but it is especially meant for mystic yogis. In other words, by this gradual process, the mystic yogis are gradually elevated to a devotional service of the Lord. So these mystic yogis sometimes perform yoga to meditate on the form of the Lord, but there are many yogis who try to achieve some mystical perfections like anima, lagima, becoming heavier than the heaviest, lighter than the lightest, and so forth. So many other mystic perfections can be achieved, which many yogis try to do. They try to walk on water. This is one of the mystic perfections. So many try to practice yoga to do achieve these performances. But at the end, all these are on material platform and doesn't help one to overcome the cycle of birth and death. End of the day, they all have to someday or other come to the process of bhakti yoga. So there, in the Bhagavad Gita, several posts are mentioned like Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. But even if one starts through Karma Yoga and Dhyana Yoga, it has to have a tinge of Bhakti, because none of these yogas can be practiced without a tinge of Bhakti. Because if one has to practice Karma Yoga, he should know to whom the results are offered to. If somebody offers a result of his work to a demigod, that is not Karma Yoga, because ultimately yoga has to link to the ultimate, that is the source of creation, that is the Supreme Lord. If one offers his result to a demigod, it may give some biased result, but end of the day, that is not perfection of life. Similarly, one has to understand Jnana Yoga by a lot of philosophical understanding, philosophical speculation, etc. Still one has to come to that stage that who is the ultimate goal of all knowledge. The Lord himself says, Vedaisya sarver ahame vedyo in Bhagavad Gita. Ultimate purpose of Vedas is to understand the Lord himself. And then Dhyana Yoga also is not a physical exercise like breathing or sitting postures, but to meditate on the form of the Lord in the heart as Paramatma. And then finally, if you see all of these processes, I've got one ultimate goal, that is reaching the supreme goal, that is the Supreme Lord only. So when one achieves this, then what happens is that the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 14, text 26, Mamcha yoga vicharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samadhitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. So, but in bhakti yoga, one who engages in full devotion service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So we are all in some way or other attached to, have so many attachments due to being a victim of the three modes of material nature, that is goodness and passion and ignorance, which are there in various combinations. Like some may be more in, some may have more domination of goodness, some may have more of passion, some may have more of ignorance. So due to the combination of these three modes of material nature, we have developed many material attachments. But the ultimate process of yoga is to become free from these three modes of material attachment. So Bhakti Yoga is the shortest and the easiest process by which one can develop, by the process of devotional service, one can attain the supreme goal of attaining the Supreme Lord. So this is also explained Bhagavad Gita as a yoga ladder. You go step by step and climb up. And the other process, a direct process of taking up the path of Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is the easiest process or feasible process, just starting with the process of chanting and hearing. So one is practical and the others are difficult. That is, Bhakti Yoga is easy process for this Kali Yoga, and the other processes are very, very difficult. And when one does the Bhakti Yoga, even the goal, the ultimate goal of all these processes is to attain Samadhi or trance, by which one is situated in transcendental position. And as the Lord says, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nasochati Nakamshati Samasarveshu Bhuteshu Madbhaktya Lavate Param. One who is transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. So if you see many who may be practicing this Dhyana Yoga and all, they may not reach a state of happiness by process, because but ultimately one has, when one is situated in the process of transcendence, position of transcendence, he has to become blissful and joyful. And what is his situation? He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards ever living entity. And in that state, the Lord says he attains pure devotional service unto me. So when one attains equanimity in under all circumstances, he neither laments nor he desires, and is always situated in pure devotional service to me. At that time, he is always in transcendence and full of bliss and happiness. So there is a quote in Srimad Bhagavatam, 12th canto, where it says that whatever result was obtained in Sakti Yoga by meditating on Vishnu, in Treta Yuga by performing sacrifices, and in Dwapara Yuga by serving the Lord's lotus feet, the same result can be obtained in Kali Yuga simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So by just chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, one can achieve all the other processes of meditation, sacrifice, and worshipping the Lord in the temple, etc. Srila Jiva Goswami has further given a quote from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, which says that in the age of Kali, the practices of austerity, yoga meditation, deity worship, sacrifice, and so on, along with their various subsidiary functions, are not properly carried out, even by the most expert embodied souls. That means even if one is practicing this Dhyana Yoga, which is the subject matter in this particular chapter, one cannot achieve the perfection of life, because it's not a process of deliverance in this Kali Yuga. Because even by the most expert, these procedures cannot be carried out. And then he says that the most perfect penance to be executed in this world is chanting of the name of Lord Sri Krishna. Especially in the age of Kali, one can satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu only by performing Sankirtana. Also, by practicing Jnana Yoga, one might reach the impersonal Brahman, where one might not be very comfortable. By constitution, all the living entities are meant to serve the Lord. But in Brahman, he enters into that Brahma Jyoti, but he does not have service. So he again feels discomfort and so comes back. Those who practice this Dhyana Yoga, they may, after many, many years of practice or many births, cycles of birth and death, there may be one out of a lakh which may achieve some perfection of trying to meditate on the form of the Lord. But then again in Kali Yuga, it is very, very difficult. But the same thing in Kali, the goal can be achieved by meditating, by just simply the process of hearing and chanting. Now in the second sloka, that is sloka number 12, it is mentioned that when the mind is perfectly purified by this practice of yoga, one should concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed eyes and see the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is also mentioned in the 8th chapter or 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where it mentioned that one should sit on a secluded place and then try to keep eyes half-closed and see the tip of the nose. This is because in Dhyana Yoga, it's so much that one should not even turn his eyes around, not hear anything externally. Now, in Kali Yuga also, it is very, very difficult because the moment one closes his eyes, he falls asleep. And when one opens his eyes fully, so many disturbing objects, the senses are driven to the sense objects. Something or other attractive is carried out, or something attractive to hear happens. In Srimad Bhagavatam also they mention as to how Vishwamitra, he was in deep meditation, but then he was disturbed by hearing just the hearing of the sound of the twinkling of the ankle bells. So the ankle bells twinkling itself could disturb a great meditative like Vishwamitra. So one should not focus much on these exercises, but rather meditate on the form of the personality of Godhead. And the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions about the Kala, not Kala, the Kala. So a description of the super soul will be given in the subsequent verses, but then there's a mention of how the Lord expands as Amsa, Swamsa, and Vibhinamsa. Amsa means expansions of the Lord. This Swamsa or expansions are the Lord's personal expansions, and the Vibhinamsa are separated expansions of the Lord. Like living entities like us, we are all Vibhinamsa, separated part and parcel of the Lord. Whereas the Swamsa expansions are the personal expansions of the Lord. Again, in the Swamsa expansion, the Lord further expands into various other forms, and they are called Kala. So here there is a mention of the Kala. Kala means here on the form of the Lord, that is the 400 form as Paramatma. That is the objective of worship of the yogis. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions how these expansions work. So the Lord's first expansion is Lord Balarama. He is the first expansion. And then from Balarama, the Lord further expands into Chaturvyuha, or it's called the quadruple expansion. That is Vasudeva, Sankarshna, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Then from the Sankarshna, the Lord further expands into further another set of quadruple expansion is mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita as Vasudeva, Sankarshna, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. And from the second Sankarshna, the Lord further expands into Sri Mahavishnu or Karanodaka Sai Vishnu, then as Sri Mahavishnu, Karanodaka Sai Vishnu, Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu, and Kshirodaka Sai Vishnu. So as Sri Mahavishnu or Karanodaka Sai Vishnu, the Lord lies down in the Karana ocean. Karana ocean means it's an ocean of cause. We are used to saying an ocean of water, but there is also an ocean of Karana or Karana ocean. In that, the Lord lies down as the Karana Mahavishnu, and from his breathing, all the from his exhale, so many universes come out, and when he inhales, all these universes enter into his body. Similarly, not only from his inhalation and exhalation, from the pores of the Lord's body, so many small universes come out in the form of perspiration, and they all expand into bubbles, and each bubble is supposed to be a universe. So they are all there, and in each of the universes, the Lord further expands from Mahavishnu to Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, and he enters into each of the universe as Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, as a super soul of that universe. So the Garbhodakasaya Vishnu is a super soul of a particular universe, and the Mahavishnu is a super soul of all the universes. The Lord further expands from Garbhodakasaya Vishnu into Kshirodakasaya Vishnu and enters into each and every living entity as the Paramatma feature. That is the Kshirodakasaya Vishnu. So this particular mention of Kala is the Paramatma feature of the Lord, which is the Kshirodakasaya Vishnu. And it is mentioned as to how one's goal should be to focus or meditate on that form of the Lord as Paramatma situated in the heart, which is Kshirodakasaya Vishnu. That is the Kala form of the Lord. So this is what I have for class today. So one should try to meditate on that form, you situated. So the goal is ultimately, the end is the same, but Bhakti yogis, the Jnana yogis normally try to meditate on the impersonal Brahman effulgence. Dhyana yogis normally try to meditate on the Kala expansions or the Paramatma feature of the Lord. And the Bhakti yogis, they always try to meditate on the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. And Brahman and Paramatma are also a partial realization of the complete feature form of the Lord, that is Bhagavan. So, but if one focuses on the Paramatma, on the Bhagavan feature of the Lord, automatically it includes the realization of Brahman and Paramatma also. So the ultimate goal of Bhagavan can be reached by the easiest process, that is Bhakti Yoga. So the process is very, very easy. The goal is also not difficult to achieve, like the other goals of Dhyana yogis and Jnana yogis, which might take many, many births. But in Bhakti Yoga, the goal is also easy. The process is also very easy to practice in this Kali Yoga. So this is what I have for today's class. So I can take any questions or comments on the subject today. So if there are no questions, then I can leave. Thank you all very much. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki.